today in Canada, more than one business owner in Nova Scotia today will die.
Right.
And there's a 50% chance that they don't have a will. If they don't have a will, then those shares in that business are going to transition. If there's no minority shareholder and shareholder agreement, they're going to transition to who? Surviving spouse.
Right.
Who may not have operating knowledge of that business, may not have a key to the front door, probably doesn't know the lenders, doesn't know the employees, or doesn't know them well, or employees are going to know that there is no succession plan. They're going to quit.
Right.
And that family business, remember, 90% of businesses in this country are family owned and controlled. So what I'm describing is very common. The family, where do they store their wealth? They store it in their business.
Right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on episode 15 of The Interesting People You Meet. I'm very happy to be joined by Tom DEANS today, who is an intergenerational wealth expert and best-selling author. I heard him speak at a conference a couple of months ago and reached out and bugged him until he agreed to be on the podcast. So we're grateful to have you here with us today. Dr. Tom DEANS is the author of Every Family's Business, the best-selling family business book of all time. It was selected by the New York Times as one of the top 10 books that business owners should read, with more than 1 million copies sold in more than 100 countries. The book provides a framework for his public lectures and seminars. Having delivered more than 1,000 speeches in 25 countries, his long-awaited sequel, Willing Wisdom, was released to critical acclaim and is already an international bestseller. This book is inspired an entertaining new digital tool called the Willing Wisdom Index that is described as the ultimate estate planning checklist. Both of Tom's books deal with intergenerational transition of family wealth. Like his books, his talks are unconventional and contrarian. Previously, DEANS was the CEO of a large Canadian multinational family business. He has worked in banking and government relations and has been the president of a railway. Tom has been featured on numerous magazines and journals, including Profit, Money Sense, Inc., The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times. He's a frequent guest on CNBC, Moneyline, BNN. Tom is a highly sought-after international public speaker on succession planning, wealth management, and philanthropic giving. With his family selling a business for more than $100 million, prepare to unlearn everything you thought you knew about business succession planning. DEANS earned his Ph.D. from the University of Warwick in England. His speeches aren't just about money and clear tax plans. They're about giving people the confidence and inspiration to transition more than just assets to family and community. Everyone, please welcome Dr. Tom DEANS. Thanks again for joining us today.
Nick, my pleasure. We've got a lot of ground to cover.
Absolutely. There's a whole bunch. With that bio, I think we could talk for hours and hours, which is amazing. And that's why we're so grateful to have you here. In this conversation, I would love to outline a couple of things, and perhaps we can just touch on those quickly and then take a deep dive if that works for you. So a few of those are intergenerational wealth transfer in Canada, transitioning hard-to-divide assets like the family-owned business and cottages, and what is preventing Canadians from completing estate plans and keeping them up to date. Tom, the floor is yours. Let's maybe start with intergenerational wealth transfer in Canada. How much is transferring right now?
A lot. It's like a tsunami. We have never ever had a moment in history where so much money is being inherited. Today, in Canada, $205 million will be inherited.
Wow. That's
today, tomorrow, and every day for the next 10 years. Roughly $1 trillion is going to transition. And most of it actually is going to transition pretty chaotically. So you're going to have people arriving, at law offices, or there'll be a reading a will or a webinar where people are finding out what they're inheriting, and most of it is a surprise. Most of it will be shocking to people. They'll either get more than they were anticipating, or vastly less, which is tragic, especially when people haven't started to save for their inheritance, thinking that their parents are going to leave them something significant. But what they're not planning for is that long-term care costs are going to eat into those inheritances, and people aren't planning, and then they're going to get a whole lot less. And so these reading of the wills are just, kind of like Hollywood moments. There's a lot of gasping. There's a lot of, shock and either surprises to the upside or downside. But very few inheritors are getting it right. And this is primarily fertile ground where I've spent my time, last 15 years, writing and commenting and helping to kind of decode that. Like, what is going on that is preventing families from talking openly and honestly and repetitively about their estate and how it's going to transition and when it's going to transition. Like, it's all wrapped in secrecy. And it's having devastating effects on families. It's tearing families apart from the inside. It's been an interesting journey to really kind of get people to hit the reset button and consider a different way of building and communicating an estate plan.
Absolutely. And some of those things you talked about are in this book here, Willing Wisdom, that I mentioned in the intro, and having read it, I've learned so much as an advisor, a financial advisor in Canada and someone who helps with tax estate insurance planning. And one of those, one thing that stuck out in the book, a number of things did, but as you just, introduced the concept, is that, these wealthy families or families with any sort of wealth at all are looking at their next generation and going, hey, they're doing very well, they're successful, they don't need the money, and then the kids are actually probably up to their ears in debt, or banking on this big inheritance, and all of a sudden mom and dad leave it to their favorite charity and don't tell their children about that. That's one, I think, of the many examples in the book. Do you want to elaborate on maybe a couple of stories that you've seen or anecdotes around that?
Oh, absolutely. Not only are parents looking at the lifestyles of their children and their bigger homes that they're living in, the more vacations that they're taking compared to themselves, right. They're looking at that lifestyle and they're saying, not only will I leave more to charity, but I'll also, I'm going to skip over my kids, generation skipping, and we'll leave it to the grandkids. Mm-hmm. They need it. They need our money. So what we often have is grandparents viewing estate planning as solving an economic need. And that's a fundamental point. There are some people who view the design of an estate plan as equalizing people's lifestyles, equalizing their kids' lifestyle. Maybe you have a high income earner, maybe you have a low income earner. So they use the estate to bring up the low performing child, or they skip over a generation, they give it to their grandkids to fund their education and start businesses and all sorts of things. And meanwhile, you have the generation that's being skipped over losing their minds. It will often really undermine the parent-child relationship between G2 and G3 when that generation skipping takes place. And a lot of this is really done innocently. It's a lot of it is done from a place of someone doing the right thing, and then they find out that they're really not thinking it through, and it's unleashing lots of chaos and family dynamics that spin out of control. And so estate planning is often at the root of some of the most, discomforting and acrimonious family dynamics. Absolutely. Broken families.
And it seems as though some of these families, as you say, it's done innocently, and therefore they're leaving a legacy of frustration and anger, perhaps to their children and or grandchildren or whoever feels left out, and they're not really here to see that. Right. What are your thoughts around that? And does that happen more often than not, or is that an exception?
I think it is happening a lot, and I don't think it is an exception. I think at the source of all of this is this really old idea that is planted in our culture that says estate planning is something that we should undertake by ourselves. It's a kind of a solo journey, and whatever you decide, you keep it secret. And I just look at this; it's really an anathema to my own personal experience, where I grew up with a family that talked very openly. We had family meetings. There was lots of transparency and conversation, and we built our estate plans collaboratively through lots of discussions and lots of changes over time. Family dynamics change over time. Family needs, family wealth. It's not a one and done, and it's not done secretly. It's done annually,
right?
Through the use of family meetings, relying on our trusted advisors.
Absolutely.
This is very rare. although it's becoming increasingly more common, particularly for wealthy families where there's more complexity. Can you imagine someone who has started a business or a number of businesses, has a cottage, has an art collection, has cars? Like, the wealthier you are and the more stuff you have, and the more it's scattered across the planet, the more complexity, the more reason there is to gather your intended beneficiaries and say, look, I've worked very hard, but I also had some good fortune. And this stuff is going to move somewhere. Money is always moving in the direction of someone. Mm-hmm. So the question is, when someone can say, I don't have all the answers, I don't understand, the best way of transitioning all this, what do you guys think?
Right.
Do you see that shift in power? We've been led to believe that if you've got the money, you've got the control, you've got the power, keep it secret, keep your assets secret, and then keep people guessing that somehow the perfect estate plan is going to appear. It's completely irrational, actually.
Right.
Some of the most successful families and estate plans are when people actually understand. Are you ready for this? Here's how we put the caramel in the caramel bar. Really, really smart people understand that estate planning isn't just about dying and then your assets move to some other person or people. They understand that estate planning is very much about the living. It's about that last chapter in life where we lose control, either mobility or cognitive function, and someone is going to step in, or multiple people are going to step in. Who? The pharmacist? Your Uber driver? No, family.
Right.
The people you're keeping financial secrets from are going to be the people who are going to have the power to make decisions on your behalf to make sure that you have a great last chapter of your life.
Absolutely.
Or not. It's a choice. So what I've been trying to do in these public lectures and in Willing Wisdom is to connect late in life care, long-term care, with estate planning. It's the same conversation with the same people. So in our family, when we're talking about designing estate plans and how the cottage is going to transition, we've got like 6 people in our family and some of us have a couple of kids. We're not going to jam 22 people into a 2-bedroom cottage. Like, we're going to have to figure out before someone dies how that cottage is going to transition. Who is it going to transition to? Under what terms? Right? And then share that. Make it transparent so that it's just like there's no gaming the family cottage. It's going to go as part of a well-discussed design plan. That's a whole lot better than people, arriving, at some funeral home and someone's going to produce a copy of the will, and mom and dad have selected one executor, one child to be the executor. And then that executor is going to tell people who's going to get what and how. And it's all a surprise and everyone's grieving. Mm-hmm. It's a disaster. The courts across this country are jammed full of families fighting because of the secrecy that define the estate.
Right.
It's not working.
And the impacts of the wealthy are there because, there's a lot more to divvy up. But I can assume this is a problem not only for the wealthy, but those who are not so wealthy and fortunate. Or am I right?
I think the less wealthy have less problems with this because there's not much to divide.
Sure, fair enough.
So what is left to divide is usually done from a place of equanimity.
Right. People
tending to get the same, they divvy up the investment portfolio, whatever, is pretty straightforward. The real chaos is the wealthier you are, the more stuff you have. The more stuff you have, the harder it is to divide. Someone is going to be aggrieved.
You got it.
There's going to be an aggrieved party unless they've worked really, really hard to bring clarity. I'm a big fan of reading biographies, particularly of great American industrialists.
Right.
You read some of the biographies on the Rockefellers and some on the Vanderbilts. Mm-hmm. Like, those are 2 great stories of robber baron families, old family monies, who went in 2 completely different directions. Rockefeller believes right out of the gate, J.D. Rockefeller, in the importance of family meetings and good family governance, right? The use of trust, relying on advisors, like not trying to build an estate plan like a do-it-yourself, buy some lumber on the weekend and build a fence.
Right.
It's like this. There's a lot of moving parts, legal considerations, And it's a constantly evolving area of the law. Like, they lean on advisors heavily, but they meet annually, some quarterly. Like, some really wealthy families meet quarterly.
Right.
They bring all the family together and say, okay, what's changed in the last 3 months? How do we improve our documents? They share. Like, there's lots of preparation of heirs, lots of education. They often, I'm a speaking resource inside family meetings a lot. Wealthy families are constantly trying to educate the next generation to prepare them for what is surely coming their way.
Right.
So yeah, they don't leave it to chance or good fortune or good luck.
And that would explain.
They really work. Yeah, they work hard to make new money become old.
And that's why we don't forget those names, and these families, their name lasts forever because they've put in this planning, right? It's unlike, well, Prince will be remembered forever, but I don't think he had a will, did he not?
He did not. Aretha Franklin, who died, I don't know, a couple of years ago of pancreatic cancer, had a number of months from the diagnosis to their death. She still didn't have a will.
Wow.
Like, there's something very peculiar going on where people, there's a lot of superstition, right? A lot of people think, well, if I talk to my family about how to divide my estate, if I go to a lawyer, write a will, sign a will, hold a will, I'll immediately die.
Sure.
Like, that's. Can you imagine me arguing that if you go to a lawyer, sign a will, hold a will, keep it in your home, that you'll guaranteed to live an extra 10 years?
Right.
Both are completely irrational.
That is
but
bizarre.
The reality is, we do know that we will die, and we do know that if we do have assets, they are going to go to someone. And if we're one of the 12.5 million Canadian adults who don't have a will, then the government has a formula waiting for you that will divide up your life's work. Chances are that formula won't mirror your intentions. And so, yeah, your assets will go according to that formula. Nothing for charity. And there it is. Kind of a real indifference. It's like, this is your entire life's work.
Right.
Wrapped in indifference. It's just so odd. And so part of what I've been trying to do is move that needle, get some of those 12.5 million, 13 million Canadians just come on, get going. Like, seriously.
Absolutely.
If you don't have a will and you've got children under 18, you have no named guardian. So the province that you reside in is going to have to appoint someone. The province still has to certify the guardian that you select, but at least you're giving someone a clue where to look for your best choice to raise your children to the age of 18.
Right.
It is incredible.
So
two would be the cost. There's a lot of people think wills are really, really expensive. Really, like, oh my God, I have to take another mortgage.
Right.
They're not that expensive.
No, absolutely.
There's a couple of online options for very basic estates. Willful is a Canadian company that's doing some amazing things. Or you can go to a lawyer, $750,000, $1,500. Even if it was $5,000, and it's not.
Right.
The cost that you will save your family, the aggravation, the cost of administering an estate that is left in confusion. Oh my God. Please don't go and get a will kit for $20. It will probably cause more problems.
Absolutely.
Right, than it'll solve.
Right.
So a lot of things going on out there where estate planning in Canada, to answer your question in a long way, it's in pretty awful shape.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what role can advisors play in helping prepare families? And further to that, like, whose job is it, do you think, in addition to your own message, to educate the Canadian population on the importance of this? I don't want to say that I've given up on the legal community, but I've largely given up on the legal community. Okay. It's not going to happen. For a whole bunch of reasons. We could do a whole podcast on why you don't see billboards. You won't see a billboard. I'll bet you $1. Right. You'll never find a billboard in Canada advertising a lawyer's estate planning services, will writing. I travel all across this country. I never see them. I see personal injury lawyers advertising. So there's argument that, advertising is just unseemly. It's not what lawyers do. Well, that's nonsense. Right. The reality is lawyers are not making a lot of money. It's a loss leader. Writing wills is not a profitable endeavor for most lawyers. The cynic in me would argue that, in fact, maybe lawyers are making a lot of money from families
in dispute.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That would be a very cynical view, but I know that there are law firms, lawyers that will take $100,000, $500,000, $1 million, $5 million estate and grind it to zero.
Mm-hmm.
They just whip the family up. I wouldn't take that from your sister. We should send a letter. Send a letter, 10 grand, 10 grand, 5 grand, 5 grand, 10 grand, 10 grand, 50 grand, end up in court, legal fees, court fees. There's nothing to divide.
Wow.
You got to write a lot of wills in order to make that kind of money. That's a real cynical view.
Yeah.
But hey, listen, if some lawyer wants to contact me and educate me, I'm all ears.
Right.
I can't figure it out. I've given up on the legal community to really elevate this issue and encourage people or make it even easier to get them in and writing wills. It's appalling.
Right.
As a general comment, I would say Canadians are really, we're hardworking, we're enterprising, we're entrepreneurial. We have done a remarkable job in the last half century in creating wealth. We are awful at transitioning wealth to the next generation. It's like all of our thinking stops. And we are leaving families in a not a great place, especially when you consider that inherited money will release potential in the next generation, right? It will start new businesses, fund education, do some really productive, great, positive things for people. Or it will accelerate demise.
Absolutely.
If you've got an addiction, a sudden inheritance that is not well communicated or planned can cause real damage in families. And that's what's taking place.
Mm-hmm. I've seen many times, I deal with business owners every day, and, we have the 70-year-old business owner whose son perhaps is, or son, daughter, whomever is in the business. And, the conversation year after year is, I'm going to get out soon. I'm going to get out soon. It's like, what's the plan? And there's generally not a plan, right? And this person just continues to age in the business. Either, in my opinion, they're having a hard time letting go. Perhaps they don't trust that person who's been working in the business for the past 10 or 15 years, if it's their son or daughter. And maybe they just have a hard time facing reality that, this might not be the person who's going to take over the shop. Do you think that connects with this conversation that we're having right now?
100%.
Yeah.
The business is part of someone's estate. Business owners, today in Canada, more than one business owner in Nova Scotia today will die.
Right.
And there's a 50% chance that they don't have a will. If they don't have a will, then those shares in that business are going to transition. If there's no minority shareholder and shareholder agreement, they're going to transition to who? Surviving spouse.
Right.
Who may not have operating knowledge of that business, may not have a key to the front door, probably doesn't know the lenders, doesn't know the employees, or doesn't know them well, or employees are going to know that there is no succession plan. They're going to quit.
Right.
And that family business, remember, 90% of businesses in this country are family owned and controlled. So what I'm describing is very common. The family, where do they store their wealth? They store it in their business.
Right.
They make money. They don't take it out and buy a Porsche. They put it back into the business. They put it back in over and over and over for 10, 20, 30 years. They become their own lender, and they own their own buildings, and they fund their own capital expansions. They love doing that because they love to have an under-leveraged balance sheet.
Right.
But what they don't realize is that they're creating their own succession planning and estate planning house of horror. They have no plan for that transition of business. So the business transitions to the surviving spouse who may not have operational knowledge, and the business fails. Or that person tries to run a business, doesn't go particularly well, then they sell it for pennies on the dollar. Or even worse, they have a heart attack trying to run a business. They're under incredible stress. They die. And then what happens to the shares in the business? They go down to the kids.
Right.
They put the business into the kids. They thrust them into business as equal shareholders. And then the kids get a letter from the CRA. And that letter goes something like this. We're sorry to hear about your loss. I'm just kidding, Nick. It doesn't say that. What does
I was going to say, what are you talking about?
What does that letter say? It says, hey, kids, that free business that you just got when your last parent died and the shares came down? Well, that triggers the capital gains. Right. And those original shares valued at $1, fast forward now, are subject to capital gains. What's the current market price? And then the kids are like, no one told us about this. Right. So where do the kids go for money to pay for their personal tax bill that they've just inherited along with the business. They reach into the company for cash, often the case that the business can't support that cash call and the business fails.
Right.
And that is why only a third of family businesses survive to the second generation in this country. A third. That's a massive amount of wealth destruction. And so when business transition, family business transition at the estate level goes poorly, employees lose their jobs, communities fail. Like we can do better. People who try to stick handle this, business owners who try to do this all on their own, are seldom going to succeed. They need third-party advisor support. Wealth advisors, accountants, and lawyers, the big three, all three have a role to play in helping that business owner contemplate and get out in front of this issue and transition it intelligently and protect the equity that's in that business. Otherwise, life unfolds, someone will die at their desk, and then here we go again.
What are some, they may be obvious to us, but what are some of the questions that, business owners should be asking themselves, or even their advisors, the wealth advisor listening to this podcast? How does he or she or they open the conversation with the business owner to help them move forward into this process, which is clear they should be doing, right?
Yeah, I think a really good place to start, particularly for a wealth advisor, would to say to a business owner, what percentage of your wealth is invested in your business and what percentage is outside? Like, that's a great starting point. And then it's usually the business owner goes, well, I can't answer that question because I don't really know what my business is worth. Great, honest answer.
Right.
So a really good starting point would be to get a third-party valuation of the business. In many cases, that business will be worth more than the business owner imagined, or it's worth materially less. Like, again, much like estate, people guessing what they're going to inherit, a lot of business owners have no clue what their business is literally worth, like based on, not on fiction or hope or fantasy, but actual paid valuation.
Right.
And so when business owners, for example, if a business owner were to get a valuation, then they go, oh my gosh, 80% of my wealth is wrapped up in my family business without a transition plan. And I'm 74 years old. Right. That is insane. Can you imagine as a wealth advisor going into a client and saying, look, we should sell everything. Sell everything. Sell your U.S. equities, sell your Canadian bonds, sell your T-bills, sell your gold, sell everything. Right. And I want to put you in one stock. I know you're 72 years old, but I'm pretty sure this thing is going to rock and roll. Like, what do you think that client would say? Yeah, they think we're crazy. They think you're crazy, and you would be crazy. You'd probably lose your license. Right. But that's what business owners are doing voluntarily. They're in complete violation of the first rule of protecting family wealth, asset allocation, spreading risk, particularly as you age. So it's really important for wealth advisors to help business owners, if they're not going to sell that business in the short term, at least get some of that equity of that business properly invested across a whole bunch of different asset classes. Absolutely. Here in Canada, we love to vacation at the cottage or go to the cottage on the weekend, and I know that can be a tremendous headache at death of the cottage owner. So, like, what does that look like? What are some of the issues that can occur when trying to pass down a cottage to the family, et cetera? Yeah, cottages are like cars. They're like jewelry. It's funny, the things where we have strong emotional connections to family history, memories, great memories, those are the assets that are hard to divide among family members. Those are the kinds of assets that really require lots of family conversation and honesty and transparency. Because in the absence of that, very few people are going to guess correctly about who is going to really value the cottage or the jewelry or the cars. Like, how am I going to really get that right so that when all is revealed and I'm not here, that everyone's going to feel fantastic about my decisions that I made in secret. Right. Like, so the cottages especially, I can tell you what we do in our family. We transition wealth. So the very first thing that is released in the administration of an estate is cash. Right. And then the executor would say, okay, now we have a number of hard to divide assets that can't be divided. Can't take a pair of scissors to a cottage. right? Can't chop it up into 21 pieces or 8 pieces, and right, they're 2-bedroom cottages. You can't jam 20 people into a cottage. So how are we going to get this cottage into the hands of the right person? And that right person may not be any family. Maybe no one in the family actually wants it. So what we would do is the executor would then say, we've done a valuation. We've had a third party value the cottage. Here's what it's worth. Who wants to buy it at market value?
Mm-hmm.
If one person steps up, they really want that cottage, they will buy it. And then if there's say there's 2 kids and only one wants to buy the cottage, they buy the cottage, the money comes to the executor. The executor would then send back 50% of the proceeds right back to the person who bought it.
Right.
There's no shortcuts in our family. There's a kind of a business structure and transparency. I'll tell you what happens when people take shortcuts. Sometimes people will fight over things. They don't actually want those things. They just don't want other people to have them.
Right.
Look, it's just cottages, jewelry especially things with high emotional value, watches,
mm-hmm.
jewelry. You put a valuation on something and ask someone to buy it. It's funny how people they'll reframe the importance of that item. We just skip over all the drama. And it's way better than putting Post-it notes. I hear this all the time. Oh, my parents have done a really great job of estate planning. They've gone around their house and they've stuck Post-it notes on who gets what. Well, how is that necessarily going to be equitable? I can tell you that when families keep the concept of equality in focus in all that they do, very seldom do the lawyers make money off the backs of those people.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine two children appearing in front of a judge saying, Your Honor, I'm contesting my parents' estate. It's outrageous. They've left us both 50%.
Yeah.
Can you hear how absurd that sounds?
Absolutely.
So equality is seldom going to get families in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. What do you think prevents Canadians from completing these, estate plans and keeping them up to date? We've covered a couple of those topics, but is there anything to add to that?
Superstition, cost, just good old-fashioned general procrastination. There's a lot of people who will say, I don't really want to go and get a will now because our daughter's expecting.
Right.
So we would just have to go back in 6 months and change it. So we'll wait.
Right.
And then she's, your daughter's going to have another child. So we wait.
Right.
And then our other child's going to have a child. So, or, what, I'm going to sell my business in 2 or 3 years. I'll wait then. Like they wait for perfection.
Mm-hmm.
There's no such thing.
Right.
There is something called a codicil. It's an inexpensive, easy way for amending wills. My point to everyone is because we don't know when we are going to die, you need these documents right now. Like right now is that moment to have those documents in place. Very easy to update. Everyone should review their will at least annually. It is remarkable what changes in the course of 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
Like material changes to people's lives.
Right.
That would change beneficiary designations, the whole thing that we haven't even talked about. But there's a lot of moving parts and pieces that should give people pause to update their will at least once a year.
Right. Absolutely.
Particularly as you move into your 60s and 70s and 80s, there's absolutely more urgency. But a lot of people, will view estate planning like an oil change. Like they'll schedule it in. They know exactly when they're going to die, when their car needs an oil change. So it doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
Every single lawyer who watches this can tell a story about doing a bedside will. And the state lawyers, they get the phone call. My father, who's in his 80s, is in the hospital. There is no will. Could you go to the local hospital and draft one? Oh my! Can you imagine a worse place?
Yeah, really.
For a lawyer to start trying to figure out where the assets are, what they are, who gets what, how they're going to get it,
right.
What percentages. Like it's just awful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You have the family members in the hallway popping their head in, trying to lobby for the cottage, and it's a complete disaster.
Yeah, and more stress to that person sitting in the bed, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not. We can do better.
Yeah.
We can do better. I think when people understand that there is an incredible resource out there
mm-hmm.
called advisors like yourself,
right,
who are skilled, knowledgeable in just helping move people to find the right solution.
mm-hmm.
Right? Like, it's not about necessarily the wealth advisor, write wills, but you've seen what's worked well. You can guide people to a qualified lawyer. You can make sure that those documents are in place and that they're stored properly. There's a whole bunch of things that advisors can help give people the confidence to begin.
Absolutely. You mentioned in the presentation that I've seen a couple of months ago the importance of wills for not only those people in their 70s, but also perhaps when we're 18 or 19 or 20 and having these in place for our children. Do you want to touch on that a little bit? Or?
Well, absolutely. There is, again, this idea that estate planning is just for really, really old people who are just moments away from dying.
Right.
The reality is when you go in for a will, you actually come out with two other bonus documents. What are they? They are the financial power of attorney, mm-hmm. which says if I lose capacity, if I bump my head and I'm unconscious, I've named someone, my power of attorney, to act as my personal CFO,
right?
Pay my bills until I get better.
Mm-hmm.
Holy smokes. You know how many people ended up on ventilators because of COVID and there was no power of attorney?
Right.
Half.
Wow.
Half of them did. And bills went unpaid because no one had the ability to write those checks.
Mm-hmm.
So we've learned the hard way through this global pandemic about the importance of estate planning for people who aren't dying. They're not going to die. They're going to be fine. So financial power of attorney. Second bonus document you get when you go in for a will, you come out with a financial power of attorney and a healthcare directive. And this is such an amazing document that will, I think, extend maybe one of the greatest non-financial gift to your family. And that, of course, is that gift to give family the clarity to make decisions about heroic measures. Basically, plug, unplug.
Absolutely.
So, family members are looking for very specific language, vegetative state, irreversible brain damage. They're listening. And when they hear those words, the document guides them in what decision to make. That is an amazing gift. There are families right now who are in hospitals and they're debating and it's not going well.
Yep.
And so maybe 2 or 3 kids are going to gang up on one and say, no, we're not going to unplug, or we are going to unplug. And then broken families,
mm-hmm.
nothing to do with money, right? Estate planning issue that has nothing to do with money. And then someone is going to be, this is how the administration of an estate is going to begin, with family members fighting over that moment. Again, the great gifts that we can give our families are, in many cases, non-financial gifts, and a healthcare directive, living will. It's called different things in different provinces.
Right.
Can be one of those gifts.
Absolutely. Wow, that's very powerful. Yeah, thinking of let's start off this process. Sadly, with having to make those decisions and get in an argument over it, and then open up the either non-existent will or the will that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That's not a great way, in my opinion, to leave a legacy to our family. That's tough. Tom, we've covered a lot of ground, and I know you've got to run, and we really appreciate you having here. Before we part, though, you discussed billboards earlier, and I'm just curious, if you had the opportunity to put a billboard in every major city and province in Canada, what would be on it?
I think it would say 12.5 million Canadians without wills. For your family, for yourself, for your community, get one today.
Nice. Wow. That's amazing. Again, Tom DEANS Ph.D., an intergenerational wealth expert and best-selling author. We're so grateful to have you joining the Interesting People You Meet podcast. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Okay.
Enjoyed it.